Freddy vs. Jason, the novelization by Stephan. Chapter 4. The black coroner's van pulled up outside 1428 Elm Street. A few cars from the Springwood PD, including the sheriff's own, were already at the scene of the crime, and the whole front of the house had been cordoned off by yellow and black police tape. On the lawn, just inside the cordon, police officers were questioning Lori, Kia, Gibb, and Blake. Outside the tape barrier, concerned neighbors looked on, and a local news crew had just arrived to capture all the action. Gibb was a mess. She hadn't stopped crying since seeing the horrifying remains of her boyfriend. Her eyes were glassy and rimmed with red. She still had some of Trey's blood on her arms from when she'd fallen over on the bedroom floor. One of the officers had draped his black jacket over her shoulders, but she was still mostly dressed in the blood-stained towel. A grim reminder of what she had just been through. Oh, God. She could see him now, Trey, being carried out to the coroner's van in a body bag by two medics. The whole thing, it was like a nightmare. Lori felt so sorry for her friend. Sure, Lori herself had never seen eye to eye with Trey, but Gibb was crazy about him, and that was all that mattered. Something caught Lori's attention. She looked away from Gibb and stared across to the open door to her home. Sheriff Williams was stepping out onto the porch. He looked very concerned. He was talking to one of his men, Officer Goodman. There was something odd about the way the two of them were behaving. Goodman looked nervous while the sheriff spoke to him in hushed tones. They didn't want anybody to overhear them. Lori strained to hear what Sheriff Williams was saying. "We have to lock this down now," he hissed. "Keep it contained. You hear me?" Lori couldn't hear all of Officer Goodman's reply, but the longer he spoke, the more rattled and louder his voice became. "Killed in bed, Jesus, it's even the same damn house. 1428 Elm. It's gotta be him, right? Gotta be Freddy Williams dragged the officer to one side. "Hey, don't even say that son of a bitch's name. Don't do it. Let's keep it together. We've been through too much to let this thing spread out now." Lori didn't understand. Didn't they know who did this? If they did, why should they want to hide it? "Freddy. Who's Freddy?" she asked. Williams stopped dead in his tracks. God damn it! Lori stared at him, waiting for an answer to her question. Blake shuffled along beside her, also waiting to hear what Sheriff Williams had to say. "What the hell are they doing here?" barked Williams, exasperated. Then he turned on his big-mouthed officer and pulled him close, making sure no one could hear him. The sheriff pushed his face right into Goodman's and hissed, "I want these kids brought down to the station. Keep them separate. Do it now." Heck, the last thing Williams needed was another Krueger episode. The fucking maniac's dead. Why do these kids keep bringing his name back? Why won't they just let the past lie? And come to think of it, why, when anything happened, did it always happen at this damned house? Williams had been with the department all his life, and the things he had seen had left a whole mess of lines on his aging features. But Springwood was his town, and most of the time he felt in control of it. Things only ever seemed to go wrong any time someone dialed 911 and called his people out to 1428 Elm. Didn't Lieutenant Thompson used to live here once? Williams sighed. He wasn't going to lose control again. Not to a bunch of drugged-out kids. Not this time. It was a few hours later before the parents of Gibb, Kia, and Blake came to fetch their kids from the police station. All three were in shock and had been given plenty of strong, sweet coffee. They were then wrapped in blankets before being let out of the building. So far, the investigation had followed normal routine. The witnesses had been questioned, and the forensic team had scoured the crime scene for clues. It was natural to question witnesses individually, so that they could not contaminate one another's statements. However, on this occasion, Sheriff Williams had other reasons for questioning each of the kids separately. There was only one of them left to talk to, the girl who'd asked him about Freddy Krueger, Lori. Lori Campbell. She actually lived at the place. Maybe when all this was done, Williams could arrange for a compulsory house purchase by the county and have that damned house demolished. The girl was still in the interrogation room. It was just off the bustling main hallway and was easily visible through a row of large soundproof windows lining the wall. Officer Goodman had just finished collecting Lori's statement and was coming out of the interrogation room. He closed the door behind him. Williams watched Lori for a moment before going to Goodman for an update. So? She doesn't know anything. None of them do. I'm pretty sure we're good. Williams was conscious of the fact that Lori was looking at him through the glass window, but she couldn't hear anything. Pretty sure? You better be damn sure none of these kids know a thing, or I'll send your ass up to Weston Hills with them. A voice from behind them cut in. What do you mean? Know what? It was Deputy Stubbs. The cop Kia had waved to a halt on Elm Street. Williams and Goodman exchanged glances before Williams lightened up and turned to Stubbs with a smile. You did a good job tonight, Stubbs. Right place, right time. But let us take it from here. Stubbs was puzzled, thinking take what from where? The handsome young deputy was fairly new to the Springwood area, but he knew all the ins and outs of standard police procedure, and he couldn't see why the sheriff should want to cut him out on something. Stubbs looked through the interrogation room window at one of the girls. Lori, was it? Sitting alone. She was still wearing the same tight pale sweater and jeans she'd worn when he almost ran her friend over. Like all good cops, Deputy Stubbs suddenly had a hunch. Leaving the sheriff, he leisurely walked over to the water cooler, filled up a disposable cup, and looked across the room. Good. Sheriff Williams wasn't paying him any more attention. Careful again not to make any loud or sudden movements, Stubbs stepped across the busy hall and quietly let himself into the interrogation room. He made sure to close the door after him. Lori sat there at the table, shocked, depressed, frightened, head down. Your father's on the way, Stubbs said. He handed Lori the cup of water. He asked us to keep you here until he gets here. Is there anything I can do for you? Lori looked up and stared him in the eye. Do they know who did this? She asked. Though the reality was that he was unsure, Stubbs had to play this one carefully. I don't think so, he replied. But I thought I heard one of the officers say a name, said Lori. It was Freddy something. Stubbs' hunch was coming good. The girl had told him something Williams hadn't. But the deputy had to be careful. The girl was in shock. She could be a loose cannon. He had to walk the fine line, play it straight. But when he opened his mouth, the words just seemed to spill out. He couldn't lie to those intelligent green eyes. Truth is, he said, I just moved here a month ago. If they suspect someone, they haven't let me in on it yet. Something about this touched Lori. She'd felt that the man who'd questioned her, Officer Goodman, was almost working against her in some way. And the sheriff, why was he so hard on her and her friends? Why were they being treated this way? But this cop, this new guy, maybe he could help her. They asked me all kinds of weird questions, she said, about my dreams. Why did... Lori was interrupted by someone knocking on one of the interrogation room windows. It was Sheriff Williams. He looked pretty annoyed. Williams waved Stubbs out into the hallway. He didn't want the deputy anywhere near that Elm Street kid. Stubbs smiled reassuringly at Lori and quickly made her a heartfelt promise. I'm real sorry. I'll look into it for you, though. Don't you worry. Everything's going to be fine. We'll get who did this. But the moment Stubbs was outside the room and on the other side of the soundproof glass, Lori saw Sheriff Williams chew the poor guy's ass right up, big time. Lori yawned. She was tired. It was nowhere near her normal bedtime, but the stress had taken its toll. Her mind needed time to recover, and maybe sleep could block all the images circling through her head, of Trey's face pouring with blood, his jaw broken, his teeth biting into his upper lip. Lori started to drift off. No, she wanted to see what was happening between the sheriff and Deputy Stubbs. Fighting back another yawn, she rubbed her eyes, took a sip of the cold water Stubbs had brought her, then looked up. The two police officers had gone. They must have walked out of view along the corridor or something. Lori decided to put the downtime to good use. She tried to remember everything that she had heard the sheriff say outside her house. She had to think, remember. Lori put her head down on the table and tried to concentrate. What was that name? What did he say? She yawned again. Freddy. He said it was Freddy something, but what? This was crazy. She had to know what was going on. Maybe Stubbs could help her. Or maybe she should just come right out with it and demand that Sheriff Williams tells her everything he knows. God, she was tired, though. Maybe she should stretch her legs. She stood up and took a couple of steps. She was tired of waiting for something to happen. Lori made up her mind and walked out of the interrogation room. "Hello?" she called. "Deputy Stubbs?" No reply. Fine, I'll just keep trying until someone does answer. Hold on. Where is everyone? Lori walked down the long hallway of the police station, but it seemed as if she was all alone in the place. Just a few moments ago there'd been people here, standing, talking, police officers. Now there was no one about. She gripped her forehead and brushed her fingers through her hair, tried to work it out. Her friends had gone home. Her dad hadn't shown yet, and presumably most of the cops still working were searching for clues over at her house on Elm Street. Yes, that must be it. And Stubbs was probably with Williams in the sheriff's office, so that the two of them could argue in private. Right, that was it. All she had to do was find Williams' office. That's where they'd be. Lori set off down the hall, her footsteps echoing along the empty corridor. A gentle breeze blew in from somewhere. It brushed alongside her, stirring the sheets of paper that were tacked to the walls. Lori hadn't noticed the papers before. They were all missing person sheets, each sheet bearing a name and a monochrome photo portrait, the details of someone who had gone missing. There were dozens of these sheets, and they all showed children. My God, so many kids. Then she heard it. It sounded like a whimper from the other side of the station. Drip. What was that? Drip, drip. Lori's eyes widened with fear. She could see red drops, blood, falling to the floor a few feet ahead of her. She looked up at the ceiling, but it was clear, no blood. And now she could see that the blood drops were leading away from her, down the corridor. Surely the killer hadn't struck again. He couldn't have, not in the police station. But where were these drops coming from? Curiosity overcame fear, and Lori decided to follow the gruesome trail of blood wherever it might lead her. She hurried down the hall, listening to the dripping sound, watching the glistening red drops on the polished wooden floor. And as Lori walked quickly on by, every single child's face and every single missing person photo on the walls turned to watch her. The flat black and white portraits swiveled in unison, their eyes following Lori as she hurried past, all except one. The photo on the last missing person sheet had no face. The photo was empty. The face of the very last child was missing. Lori heard another whimper. She didn't know the missing kids were watching her, and suddenly she found herself trying to locate the sound of that voice, rather than the origin of the blood drops. Another whimper. It came from just around the corner of the hallway, which was precisely where the trail of blood was headed. The fluorescent strip lights overhead seemed to be working at full strength, but somehow there were shadows along the corridor. Lori found herself pausing to take a deep breath before peeking her head to see around the corner. But whatever it was that Lori expected to see, or whatever it was she feared, she did not expect to see a little girl crying with her head in her hands. The girl stood halfway down the corridor, with her back to Lori. She wore a pretty white dress and had sandy-colored shoulder-length hair. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. What the hell was she doing here so late? Why wasn't anybody looking after the poor kid? Lori's fear was gone in an instant, and she ran forward to help the little girl. "Are you okay?" asked Lori. The girl said nothing. She just sobbed. Lori was with her now. She bent and placed a gentle hand on the crying girl's shoulder. The girl turned to face Lori, and she wasn't crying anymore. Lori screamed. The girl, she had no eyes. They'd been stabbed out. A vertical cut, a slash, ran down through the center of each empty bloody eye socket, starting above the brow and ending just below the lower eyelid. The eyes were a deep red mess. Who could have done such a horrible thing? Despite her shock, despite her fear, Lori noticed tiny flecks of rust embedded in the wounds, almost as if someone had attacked the girl with an old knife. Someone had done this to her. Someone had taken a knife to the little girl's face, turned her into a real-life doll. Drip, drip. Oh God, no! The trail of blood spots Lori had been following had fallen from the girl's ripped-up eyes. The blood trickled from her two gaping wounds like tears of pain, only to fall slowly to the floor at the girl's tiny feet. Lori stifled back a sudden gut rush of puke.
His name is Freddy Krueger,
said the blind girl flatly.
And he loves children, especially little girls.
What was going on? What was this? How did the girl know who this Freddy was? Why won't the sheriff do something? Lori wanted to help, but found herself backing away from the girl in terror. But the girl, even without her eyes, merely turned and looked Lori in the face.
Freddy's coming back. Soon he'll be strong enough. It's okay to be afraid. We're all afraid. Or your friends. Or everyone.
Behind Lori was a large wall-mounted map of Springwood, on which were tacked a number of wanted posters and crime scene photographs. The little girl took a step forward, causing Lori to step back involuntarily. And again, soon Lori was almost pressed up against the police map. Only it wasn't a police map anymore. It was the door to her home, 1428 Elm Street. Something touched her head. Blood. Lori ran forward with a scream and turned to see blood seeping through the tight gap between the white door frame and the top of the painted yellow door. Then the blood began to run, to flow. It poured down, and soon the entire front door of her home had turned red beneath the liquid sheet of fresh blood. Where the hell was she? This was her home. She was sure of it, but it looked different, older, dirty, and decrepit, all boarded up.
3, 4, then lock your door.
And the door was covered with blood.
5, 6, grab your crucifix.
Lori found it hard to believe this place was her home. It looked terrifying. There was no way she was going to go back in there. What had the police done to it?
7, 8, gone, stay up late.
That singing. Lori turned around and there were graves, tombstones, memorial slabs, stone crosses, headstones, graves, all over her front lawn, and on the neighbor's lawn and across the street. Lori held her breath. Every house on Elm Street had been turned into a graveyard.
9, 10, never sleep again.
Playing on the graves of 1428 Elm Street were 3 pretty young girls wearing their finest white satin party dresses, their hair clean and immaculate. No girls dressed like this anymore. They all looked like something from an old photo album. 2 of the girls held onto the opposite end of a jump rope, and they twirled it over and over, while the 3rd girl stood between them and jumped over the rope. Over and over, the rope cut through the air. But that thing, that rhyme that they were singing, Freddy's coming for you. What Freddy? What was that? Lori didn't think she could be any more afraid until she heard that laugh, low, guttural, evil. What was happening to her? The children carried on playing jump rope as if they hadn't heard a thing, but Lori had heard it, and a man rushing towards her from across the street. Gone. Lori thought she'd seen. Even closer. He wore a red and green sweater and a snap-brimmed hat. Gone. Was Lori going crazy? She rubbed her eyes and looked again. He was running across the lawn. His face was all burned and disfigured, and his hands, he had knives for fingers. Gone. What the hell? He was right in her face. Freddy Krueger shoved his ugly mouth right up into Lori's face and said, "Boo!" Lori fought and waved her arms, but someone was holding her, trying to grab her. She lashed out and hit back. "Are you all right?" Stubbs asked. "What?" Lori stopped and opened her eyes. Deputy Stubbs. She was still in the interrogation room, but the hallway and the little girl. What was happening to her? "I was just going to turn these lights down," said Stubbs, "so you could get some sleep, but—" Stubbs had already placed his jacket over Lori's shoulders while she'd been asleep. Asleep in the interrogation room. Lori had been dreaming. She'd had a nightmare. She sighed, relieved. "That's okay. I think I'll stay awake and wait for my dad to get me." But Lori was soaking with sweat. Her dream had been so real, she could remember every second of it. Though what could she expect after what had happened tonight? She must still be in shock. Still, there was something about that dream. She had no intention of going back to sleep that night. Her friends were having trouble getting to sleep too, while Lori sat huddled in Deputy Stubbs' jacket in the interrogation room of the police station. Blake was sat on the porch swing in front of his house almost halfway across town. What a shitty evening. Trey had been Blake's best friend. Blake couldn't believe it. He just couldn't deal. No one knows who done the damn thing. No one saw who did it. No one saw anything, not even Gip. Blake was so lost in his thoughts, replaying those last few minutes in his mind. Gib running down the stairs, him, Kia, and Lori going up to look at the body, that he didn't hear his father open the front door and come out to join him. "Blake," his dad said, "we have to talk, son." Blake didn't even look up. He just stared blankly ahead, leaving his father to stand. So his father tried a more direct approach. "What the hell were you doing over there? You were supposed to be watching your sister. Were you drinking?" That caught Blake's attention all right, but all it did was annoy the hell out of him. "My best friend was just killed, Dad. So how about give me some fucking space, okay?" His father just stared at him, and they both froze in uncomfortable silence. There was no point arguing with the boy, not while he was so upset. Blake's dad shrugged his shoulders and went back inside. Blake just needed some time. But Blake was pissed. He couldn't believe how fucked up his dad was. Always on his case with his fucked up, petty fucking rules. Blake pulled out his silver flask. He'd been hitting the liquor pretty hard since arriving at Lori's house. Now he drained the last numbing drops of the strong alcohol. He was already drunk. That was how he'd found it so easy to tell Dad to go fuck himself. But now that the flask was empty, Blake had only one thought in his head. "I'm gonna get him for you, Trey," he drawled, holding the empty flask up towards the heavens in solemn intoxication. "The cop let it slip. Somebody named Freddy. I'm gonna take him out myself, Trey. I swear to fucking God." The flask slipped from his hand and fell onto the ground. He was about to pick it up when he heard a rustling sound come from behind the bushes, over on the side of the yard. "Who's that?" More rustling. "Someone there?" Blake waited and watched. The bushes moved again. There was definitely someone there. There was definitely someone hiding in the bushes. Maybe the psycho had followed him. The psycho could be coming after all of them, not just Trey. He could be stalking all the kids like some dumb fuck from a horror movie. Well, if the sick son of a bitch was coming after Blake, he just made a big mistake. Blake braced himself, then started to walk slowly over towards the bushes. "If that's you, Freddy, I'm gonna kick your ass." His words said one thing, but his voice said completely the opposite. "If that's you, Freddy, I'm gonna kick your ass." His words said one thing, but his voice said completely the opposite. What the? Blake whipped around to see a goat standing in front of the porch where he'd just been. A goat? A fucking goat in Springwood? In the middle of the night? Blake would have laughed if the goat's white beard hadn't been stained with blood. Jesus! Then he heard the laugh. Although he couldn't possibly know it, Blake was hearing the very same laugh that Lori had just heard in her dreams, and Blake could see the same nightmare figure Lori had seen in her nightmare. He was standing across the street, nothing more than a silhouette of a man in a funny hat, a shadow that stretched across the street, reached over the road and slid along the ground like oil until it reached Blake's feet. Blake's Dutch courage suddenly deserted him, and he turned to run, heading into the jet silhouette of Freddy Krueger. Krueger's shadow lashed out with the razor glove. Blake screamed as the 5 dark blades tore at his chest, only to pass right through. No pain, no tearing. It was as if Blake had been attacked by a ghost or a shadow. I'm okay, he laughed in amazement. I'm not hurt. Freddy was enraged. His shadow wavered, became insubstantial. Not strong enough yet, he growled, but I will be soon. Soon enough. Until then. Krueger's black outline dissipated into thin air, leaving behind only an echo of the completed threat. I'll let Jason have some fun. Ah! Blake woke up on the porch swing with a scream. The empty flask was still in his hands. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. His chest was fine, no wounds. He was okay. It was just a dream. A fucking dream. Why didn't his dad wake him up? His dad. Blake's father was sitting beside him on the swing, but Blake had seen him go indoors. Or did he dream their argument as well? No, their fight was real. His dad must have come out and sat beside him while he'd been asleep. Dreaming about goats. Way weird. Blake sat forward. He regretted shouting at his dad earlier. It was the booze. Blake wanted to apologize, but he didn't know how to start. Clearly the old guy was waiting for Blake to make the first move, because he hadn't said a damn thing since Blake woke up. Blake gently nudged his father on the arm. His father's head pitched sideways and tumbled down into Blake's lap. He had been decapitated. Blake screamed out in horror, his eyes locked on the fresh red stump of his dad's broken neck. White bone lay within, surrounded by a ragged mess of soft, glistening flesh. He could feel the cold, moist weight of the freshly severed head upon his lap. Blake sprang up and ran towards the street, letting his father's head fall and roll along the porch. Blake knew the answer. It's a dream. It's only a fucking dream. Ahead of him were the bushes that he saw moving in his nightmare. Wake up, I gotta wake up, Dad! Oh, God! Blake ran straight into the arms of Jason Voorhees. The butcher raised the machete high above his head. Blake whimpered, Freddy? The machete came down and lopped Blake's booze-addled head straight off his shoulders in one clean, powerful swipe. Blake's mouth screamed noiselessly as his head went flying through the air, before squelching to a thud near the porch swing. 2 severed heads looked each other in the face, like father, like son. A few miles away, on the outskirts of Springwood, stood Weston Hills Psychiatric Hospital. Anyone taking the isolated road that led up to the gates of the asylum was met with a sign warning against trespassing. This just had to be somebody's idea of a joke, because Weston Hills was the last place on Earth anyone would want to break into. Most people wanted to break out. The institution was huge, a brick neo-Gothic mansion, originally built in the 1890s. As the private home of a local tycoon. When the original owners left town in the 1930s, they handed the building over to the state. The remote location and the impressive size of the place made it ideal for the incarceration of the criminally insane. The people of Springwood weren't too happy to have a mansion full of murderous lunatics opened on their doorstep, and no one wanted to work there save for a handful of medical staff, who had to rely on charity workers for general support and nursing. So folk weren't too upset when in 1946 the place was shut down. There had been a scandal. One of the nurses, a nun, had somehow been captured and held prisoner by the inmates. They'd kept her hidden for days, during which time they'd raped her hundreds of times until she herself had become totally insane and pregnant. The nun's religious name was Sister Mary Helena, but she had been born Amanda Krueger, and the room she'd been locked in was no better than a dungeon, with its rusted walkways, scalding pipes, and heavy iron door. 9 months after her terrible ordeal, Sister Mary Helena gave birth to a son. The delivery was agonizing, a breech birth, and when it was done, Amanda was taken back to her room and locked up. She was in no condition to raise the child. So it was taken from her and put up for adoption. It was the baby's cruel stepfather who named the Krueger kid Freddy. The whole horrifying story soon became common knowledge around town, and as Freddy grew up, he had to suffer constant abuse and taunting from all the other kids right through school. And when he got home from school, his no-good stepfather would repeatedly beat him with a leather strap. In time, pain and fear became Freddy's only friends. Krueger never once visited his mother. As far as he was concerned, she was to blame for everything that was wrong with his life. When he crushed small animals with his bare hands, it was Mommy's fault. When he slashed his own stomach with a straight razor, Mommy was to blame. When he stabbed his drunken stepfather in the eye, his mommy made him do it. The fucking bitch! When Krueger was arrested and killed in 1966, it was generally believed Amanda Krueger had hanged herself. There was even a headstone with Amanda's name on it in the town cemetery. But the grave was empty. It wasn't until many years later that Amanda's body was found, walled up in a room inside the high tower at Weston Hills, by which time the hospital had long been in use again. Developments in medical practice had led to Weston Hills being reopened in the late 1960s as a more enlightened center for the treatment of general psychiatric illness, which it continued to be until the present day, save for a brief period in the 1980s when the place was closed down owing to yet another malpractice scandal. Now, however, Weston Hills was very much a progressive institution. It prided itself on offering good, proactive, up-to-the-minute health care that was perhaps at odds with the intimidating, haunted house exterior of the building itself. There was certainly no truth to the rumors that any of the patients currently being treated at Weston Hills were being held unnecessarily or, in any way, against their will. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been Chapter 4 of Freddy vs. Jason, the novelization by Stephan. Really enjoyed this chapter. For the most part, it was a carbon copy of what went down in the movie. But I do like how Blake's death was a little bit different than it was in the movie. And I really enjoyed the last bit of the chapter, which was kind of the backstory on Weston Hills Psychiatric Clinic. How it mentioned Amanda Krueger, you know, the entire backstory of the bastard son of 100 maniacs that we've seen. It even talked about Freddy's abusive stepfather, Alice Cooper. Really love those throwbacks there. It's like this author is a huge, either is a huge fan of Freddy and Jason, or he just did a lot of research going into writing this novelization, because I know a lot of this stuff was not in the script. It just probably wasn't. Especially the stuff he talked about in the prologue in Chapter 1, with the whole Jason Goes to Hell backstory, talking about how Crystal Lake connected to the sea and all that, which kind of filled in the plot holes of Jason Takes Manhattan. But as far as this chapter goes, in this part of the movie, and this part of the book, I always enjoyed Laurie's first little nightmare there with Freddy. with the girl with her eyes gouged out. It was always so creepy, such a creepy, memorable scene from Freddy vs. Jason, and the book did it even more justice with the descriptions. And then Freddy coming up to her with the whole boo thing. Hope I didn't blow out anybody's eardrums that was listening with headphones. Sorry about that. But yeah, for the most part, I really enjoyed that. I love the character of Stubbs. I think in the movie he dies, a lot different than I expected him to. Perhaps it's different in the book, maybe not. We'll find out when we get there. This is my first time reading the novelization. On this channel, I like to narrate books and read them for the first time when I'm narrating them, if I can help it. So I like to be surprised along with you guys. So yeah, I'm enjoying this one so far. I really enjoyed the prologue in Chapter 1. I love the character development. I like the characters in the book a lot more than the movie so far. I hope Stubbs has a little more involvement than he did in the movie. I really am hoping for that. Thought it was cool that Blake got a different death than he had in the movie. That was pretty neat. So yeah, even the Freddy dream was a little more... Blake's dream with Freddy and his encounter with Jason was a little more drawn out and a little more vivid. A little more imagery used there. Made it feel a little more intense to me. Alright guys and gals, let me know what you thought of tonight's upload, and I'll be back very soon with more of Freddy vs. Jason, the novelization by Stephan Hand. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and pleasant dreams!
Hi, this is Jeffrey Reddick, creator of Final Destination.
Greetings, Slashaholics. This is David Bergantino, author of the Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror books, the Bard's Blood horror Shakespeare books.
Hey guys, this is Jason Brooks, Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th Vengeance.
Hey, this is Slasher Pepper.
Hey everybody, it's CJ Graham, Jason, Friday the 13th Part 6.
This is William Pattison, known to Friday the 13th fans as Eric Morris.
Hi, this is Deborah Voorhees from Friday the 13th Part 5.
Hey folks, this is Adam Marcus, director of Jason Goes to Hell and Secret Santa.
Hello, kiddies. This is John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper.
Hi, this is Kane Hodder, better known as Jason from Friday the 13th, Victor Crowley from Hatchet.
And you are listening.
You're listening.
And you're listening.
And you're listening.
Just want to make sure you guys know you're listening.
You are listening.
And you are listening.
And you are lucky enough to be listening.
Okay, boils and ghouls, you are listening.
You are listening
to the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
The 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To 80s Slasher Librarian.
To 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
to the 80s Slasher Librarian. Keep listening, or I'll kill you.